Just wanted to create a quick video because I know everyone's working on their posters, finalizing posters and slides, and a couple of things that we haven't talked about yet when it comes to presenting that I think it's worth just quickly running through. Um, and most of it has to do with just formatting, how we format and design and layout slides and posters. One of the best resources I've come across is this website, practicaltypography.com. And the Butterick, I think, yeah, Butterick's Practical Typography. I forget what his first name is, but his last name is Butterick. He provides really practical advice from a professional, someone who creates documents and like magazine articles and professional documents all the time. What are professional standards when it comes to these kinds of things? Unfortunately, I think we don't really ever get taught how to do this stuff well, and a lot of the times we create layouts that look amateurish without knowing it, and it takes a little while. But once you start to once you hear these tips, it becomes impossible to ignore, and bad designs will jump out at you really easily. So it's worth, I think, spending a few minutes to go through a couple of these layout tips. And I recommend going to this website and go reading through some of the sections in there because there's a lot of great stuff, way more than I can touch on here. But I'll just touch on a few things that I see all the time that I don't think is generally well is not really uh, discussed or well known. The first one is about underlining in documents. His suggestion is don't ever underline. It's ugly, makes text harder to read. And he gives an example. You can look at that later. The point is avoid that. Also avoid centered text. It's overused. It does kind of look, to me now, it looks amateurish. Most layouts, if you look, even just pick up a book and you'll see, some of the stuff. Um, in this case, the title is centered, but there's stuff not centered on it. Um, Generally, you'll see things that are, here's another thing that's from a while ago, things that are left just usually left justified, I think looks more professional on documents and magazines and books and things like that. So that's my suggestion, is to uh, avoid that, especially on blocks of text. It's one thing to center a headline or one line of text. So often in publications, the rule is what publishers will usually want in a journal article. If you have a caption under a figure or a caption over a table, they will ask you to center it if it's one line, but if it's more, as soon as it goes over one line, you left justify. So that's something to keep in mind. So definitely you should never have multiple lines of text that are centered. It becomes almost impossible to read because well, not impossible to read, but very hard to find the start of each line. Your eye has to jump around a lot. Font choice. We've been using Railway, and I recommend we could standardize that across all the posters as a final check, posters and slides. It's a free font that you should be able to get if you don't have it on your computer already. Um, I think it's one of the Google fonts, but in any case, the key message around fonts is if you avoid, the best thing you can do when it comes to fonts is avoid the most standard fonts. So never Butterick suggests never choose Times New Roman or Arial. It, they're way overused and it makes it feel, and you may not even recognize this, but it's just something that's a subconscious feeling you get when you look at a document that's in Times or Arial. It looks like almost every other document you've ever written, and it looks like the default. It's similar to what happens if you see a graph that, the old Excel plot like this. If you just put some numbers, if you put 6 numbers into Excel and and create a graph, it puts in these default formatting colors, lines. It just looks like Excel created that, and it kind of subconsciously looks like you didn't put much effort in because it's the default colors that usually we see. So this is the new version of Excel. I think whatever the current version is, this is their new default colors. But in both cases, it looks very generic, default. It's worth taking a minute to clean these up, to change the formatting to something that looks more, usually going cleaner and minimalistic. More minimalist is my suggestion, is always trying to go clean, minimal when it comes to figures. This is an example. This piece shows why that's helpful. The more you cut down information on these graphs, and highlight what you're trying to get across, usually that's the best thing. You get across the comparison or one specific. You want to highlight something about the graph. We try to strip away extra lines, extra backgrounds, outlines on figures, just strip it all away. Less is more is the message from this one. Here's another one for tables, same idea. You can, if you ever show a table, the more lines and shading and stuff you can take off. Avoid centering things. You're going to see that in part of this, they're going to left justify things as a default. Again, that's I think that's usually looks cleaner. You don't need to put lines. In fact, many journals, when you're submitting publications, journals will tell you you're not supposed to put, they don't like seeing physical lines on tables. They prefer you use this sort of justifying in the columns, justifying the text to create a line that looks cleaner and more minimalist and gets information across easier. The last thing I'll suggest is think about when you're creating posters or slides, like there's people who spend a lot of time and money thinking about the best ways to present information. This is OpenAI, for example, at one of their keynote talks, and this is like the famous talk when the iPhone was launched, Steve Jobs. And think about what their figures look like, what their slides look like when they put something up on a screen. It looks clean and minimalist, minimal words, mostly graphic elements. I think that's because those are the things that resonate with people, that get messages across better. They don't usually look like things like this. This is from a class that I taught last year in the fall. And this is, I have a couple of examples from student presentations and how I would try to clean them up a little bit to make them look better. The easiest thing you can do to make things look better is to align boxes, make boxes. If you have multiple things side by side, they should, in every direction when you look across, they should align um, in a neat way. So this line, it just doesn't make any sense. Once you start seeing it this way, by the way, you won't be able to unsee this, and it'll drive you crazy. So I'm sorry if I'm awakening this realization in you, but the problem here is, why is this edge not aligned with this edge? It will look cleaner if this edge is over here, this box is made bigger so that it's the same size as the box above it, and these boxes could be the same height as the box next to them. Again, this one could be positioned so that it's aligned perfectly with that one. I would probably start by making sure, I would probably make all of these boxes the same size. I think I have, yeah, so here's an example of how I might redistribute. I would not have centered text like this. We have more than one line of text. I think it always looks better to go to left justify those. Yeah, gives you an idea of what I would do with that to try to make it look tidier. A slide like this, I think the main point I have here is there's way too much information on the, yeah, having too much information on a slide makes it very difficult. If you're speaking while you put up a slide like this, people will be distracted. They will be trying to read and they won't be able to listen to you. They'll be reading and not listening. You want them listening to what you have to say. So it's always better to say the stuff that you would put in bullet points. And if you need to, you can have 1 word or 2 words or 3 words, bullet points with a short description, but not sentences of information, so that at least it's one thing to read a couple of and a couple of bullet points that ideally show up one at a time. So you advance a slide, you talk about a bullet point, it pops up, you advance the slide, the next bullet point pops up. That's far better than having sentences of text all show up at once. That's distracting. People are trying to make sense of what you just put in front of them while you're talking about the first bullet point. Again, another layout from a student where I rework this. This is a uh, system that sort of exercise system called Centivisor. And here's how, I just think this is way too much information to put on one slide to get across what's happening here. I would have multiple slides with this same information. So I would first, if you're talking about this, I would say, here's, I think the name of the app is called To Race With Me by the company, excuse me, the company name is Centivisor. I would say, the first slide might show an overall picture of what this system should look like, blown up big. This is just one of my suggestions. If you have pictures, blow it up to the full size of the screen if you can, from one edge to the other. It's sort of, we're talking about removing information, right? There's this concept in engineering called signal to noise ratio. The signal, what we want to do is increase the signal and decrease the noise. That's what you saw in those animations where they were taking away lines and noise from the graphs and the tables. If you try to one of the things that you can do whenever you're showing pictures on a screen, on a slide, I think that the edges of a picture are kind of like noise. If you expand the picture full width on a few different, at least one of the axes, you take away some of that noise. It's easier to see, okay, there's just one thing rather than imagining a figure that's like a little bit smaller. You could have made this so that you can see a border of this picture. I don't think it's ever helpful to have that border there. If you can, I would go full screen. I would, in this case, if you go back to the original thing, what they're saying here, this is one of the screens that they would show you so you can select, I think, where you're going to do your bike racing exercise game. This is one of the screens that they present to you. I would show it as if it's sitting on a computer in front of me to put it in context, as one example. And it's sort of having these floating images, I think, is better. Having, in this case, it's framed with the computer, but the computer is not, I found something that had a transparent background in this case, so you don't see any other cutout edge of the picture that has the computer in it. Here's another slide from a presentation that a student did, and here's my suggestion on how to clean it up. Again, putting, like, these things are just, it looks unintentional. It looks like someone just stuck these 4 images on this slide without really thinking about where they should go. If you can demonstrate, here's the thing that I want you to pay most attention to, let's put that big in the middle, and then put some other contextual pictures in a row at the bottom. To me, this looks far more intentional than a scattered set of pictures where you see the edges of every picture. Yeah, less noise, more signal, I think, in something like this. Another way to do that, if you have to show the edges of a picture, I find one thing that makes things look a little bit cleaner is if you round the corners. There's an option for cropping. I think it's crop to shape, and putting a rounded corner on these images, I think at least it's there that they become, cropping them to the same height and width at least makes them feel a little bit better. I think my preference still is to try to join them all together. If they're kind of, in this case, they're all talking about the same thing, they're all kind of talking about context, I would join them together. I think this is my last example. If you have a figure like this, don't take up valuable real estate. Like, this is quite a detailed This is quite a detailed figure that's trying to get across an idea. Adding text off to the side about significance and impact, I think, is adding noise. I think this is far better. Oh yeah, if and there's bullet points that come up. That's which I like. I like the fact that those bullet points came in one at a time. But I think this is far more effective if you have just the image blown up again, rather than have that extra text off to the side. Just say the stuff that's in the text while you're presenting it. You can describe, I can't remember what it is, the significance and impact of what is the significance and impact of this hierarchy of controls? Why is this important? That's what you're there to talk about. You don't need to have it on the slide. I think sometimes I think we use slides as crutches too often, where we're worried we're going to forget what we want to say, or and that's fine. Sometimes I do use bullet points on a slide to remind me of something that I don't want to forget to say. But I think it's better if you can avoid doing that. I think it's cleaner if you just have big pictures, big figures, and it's as if you're talking to people. Imagine you're talking to people without any slides behind you. You're just talking to people, and every once in a while, there's something that you can explain clearer if you have a figure. This kind of complex relationship of a hierarchy of controls, rather than trying to explain to someone each of these things, saying each of those things, people will get the idea much clearer if you do put a figure up like this. But the rest of the text doesn't add much. So I think that's all I wanted to say. Yeah. So there you go. So there's some tips on creating slides and presentations. Thanks.